What's up, everybody? Thralls Mellow here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you, and needless to say, this is probably one of the most anticipated albums coming out this year. Definitely this month, I would say. Yeah. We are going to go over the latest offering from the Black Dahlia Murder, Servitude. This comes out on the 27th of September on Metal Blade Records. This band formed in 2001 in Detroit, Michigan. This is their 10th full-length overall. First one since the tragic passing of Trevor, their longtime frontman, just all-around awesome dude. And naturally, because of that, this is a whole new era of the band. Brian, their longtime rhythm guitarist, has stepped up and taken over on vocals. And the band welcomed back former lead guitarist Ryan Knight to complement the rest of the lineup. And, I mean, it is an understatement for us to say that we were eagerly anticipating this one, but also, like, I don't know, we've had, like, a lot of weird feelings about this. Like, nothing ever against this band. We ranked them. We loved this band. Yep. But, I mean, this sort of period in between Trevor's passing and then the band reforming, doing live shows, and now this new album, it feels still kind of surreal.
Yeah, it still hits really close to home. Like, you know, Trevor passing was a huge deal. I still think about that a lot. Yeah, and the band's situation, you know, to come back after something like that is a huge undertaking anyway. Like, that's a pretty big thing. And their decision to keep doing this, I think, is really cool.
Yeah.
It's just really weird. But not in a bad way. Just, I don't know, I wasn't sure what to think, how to feel about this.
I mean, like, as long as I've been listening to this band, which is all the way back to Unhallowed,
yeah,
I've always associated this band with Trevor's vocals, his presence on stage. And without that, you know, this still 100% sounds like Black Dahlia Murder, but again, like, there's part of it that is just sort of, like, haunting to me. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I don't know, like, I try not to let that get in the way of this review at all, because I just wanted to go over this album. I wanted to hear this. I like the singles. Yep. And, I mean, baseline, this 100% sounds like Black Dahlia Murder. So if you were worried that this was going to come out sounding like a completely different band, totally dismiss that thought, smother it with a pillow, bury it 6 feet deep in the backyard, because it totally didn't happen. This, again, sounds like Black Dahlia Murder. Everything that this band does, I would say, is very much present on here. Tight, melodic riffs, insane drum work, great leads, and, I mean, probably the biggest factor that, you know, I think everyone was worried about, at least up until they heard the singles or probably saw them live, was how was Brian going to handle being the frontman? And vocally, I think he does a damn good job.
I mean, he always has, regardless. He's been doing backup vocals for years anyway, so, I mean, it's not an incredibly stark departure from what it was when Trevor was there. To be honest, Brian sounded a lot like Trevor in most moments. If you go back to records such as Miasma or Nocturnal, there were times anyway when you couldn't really differentiate the two to begin with.
It's still very much their style of melodic death metal that we've grown accustomed to over these years. It's, you know, like, kind of, you know, Gothenburg melodic death metal, but with like a US death metal filter on it, so you still get more blast beats. It's still notably a little bit more intense than, say, like At the Gates or In Flames, but it still has all those, you know, tropes of those bands. The melodic harmonies, the more like hooky nature of it, but just done at, I don't know, Mach 10, because this album moves fast. In fact, I would say this album kind of flows like some of their more brutal stuff in general. Like, I thought of Abysmal in particular, just because that is a very fast-paced album overall. While the opening track does take a little bit to get going with the atmospheric setup with waves and acoustic melodies, as soon as it kicks in with these snare rolls and just tight syncopated riffs, it is heavy right out of the gate. And that first scream you hear from Brian, I was like, yeah, no, that's exactly the scream I needed to hear.
Right, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, yeah. That song in particular, when it kicks in, that riff is particularly gnarly right off the bat. Like, this record immediately lets you know that it's not planned. Super riffy and super intense, which is all over this album. Songs like Aftermath, Asserting Dominion, Servitude, the title track. They're going, and there are no breaks. Alan Cassidy, great fucking job, man. As always, you know, you've been a hell of a drummer, but I feel like Alan's speed is dialed in really intensely here.
Everything about this album, I feel, is like more condensed. This only clocks about like a little bit over 32 minutes, but everything is very tight, very syncopated, and for the most part, very fast. Like Aftermath, which was their first single, honestly, it was probably the right single to release. Like, hey, let's remind everyone that, you know, we are blast beat champions because we've had
yeah.
that shit printed on our shirts for a while. We got to own up to it. And that song does in a particularly vicious sense. Like that one has like a little bit more straight up death metal to it. It's notably more brutal, more sinister. You kind of get a little bit more of that on the title track too. Just the heavier side of Black Dahlia Murder showing up and still managing to throw in a lot of like killer lead harmonies and just catchy melodies and, well, just flat out awesome solos. Every lead on here is awesome. One problem though, when I was looking through the liner notes, it doesn't say who did the solos. Now, I would assume it was Brandon Ellis because it's Brandon Ellis. That dude's an absolutely amazing guitarist. But Ryan Knight being back in the band, some of them occasionally kind of sounded a little bit more like his style, like Curse Creator. There's just something about that lead that sounds a little bit more like Ryan's leads. And there's definitely some moments where I feel like there's some lead trade-offs, like Transcosmic Blueprint and a little bit on the last track, Utopia Black. But regardless, the lead work across the board in here is absolutely scorching. Great phrasing, loads of melody. It's still technical and precise, but there's a lot of feel to it. And that, again, kind of screams Brandon, because when Brandon jumped in on Nightbringers, like his lead work absolutely was just striking.
I mean, the lead work in Black Dahlia Murder has always been no slouch. Yeah, pretty much since Everblack, the propensity for good lead work has just been through the roof. Particularly the lead, I thought, on Mammoth's Hands. That lead is something else. That's probably, I think, one of the best leads on the whole record.
Also, it's one of my favorite songs here, and that was their second single, and that was also kind of like the right single to release. Showcases a very different side of this album, one that doesn't pop up as much in terms of like a slower pace song. This song is still intense, but it's very ominous and kind of epic sounding, and I like the fact that it's, you know, just again, like a little bit groovier. It kind of lets the melodies sink in a little bit. It's not as like, you know, and this band's kind of technical to a point, but that one I feel like the riffs are more about just like striking melodies, and my God, when that lead break hits, like that's honestly my favorite lead on the album. That song in particular also really showcases like that classic melodeath side, and I love when that pops up, and generally it's on a lot of the bridges, like Panic Hysteric. There's some just flat out In Flames, Jester Ray style melodies, again kind of played their way, which again is faster and way more brutal. And Transcosmic Blueprint, which that song had a really fun surprise in it. The whole lead section on there, it kind of turns into like this almost proggy jam session, and I'm reasonably sure there's some lead trade-offs on there. If not, then, you know, Brendan's doing an awesome job just like doing very different leads back and forth. But it kind of draws out this section, and the thing that really struck me was that part of that song is very playful. It's very fun. And if anything, that is like, you know, very heartwarming to me considering everything that this band has been through in recent years, just to hear them kind of have a moment on there where it's not so dark, it's not so bleak, it's just kind of a fun riffy jam with some great leads, and then it gets right back to absolutely caving your head in with, again, grooves, blast beats, and just sick riffing.
It explores a little bit more dynamic too, I think, in Transcosmic Blueprint. Just you can tell they kind of opened up a little bit more and kind of stepped maybe outside of the box of the normal realm of Black Dahlia Murder. To me, it reminds me a little bit more of what they were trying to do in Verminous. Like, it's not just the typical blast beats and straightforward verse, chorus, bridge, breakdown, here we go. They're playing a little bit more with the parts. Like, the song has a little bit more room to breathe. There's a bunch of great transitions in that song, and it flows, again, kind of more like a proggy song than it does a normal, typical Black Dahlia Murder song.
This album, I would say, is very stripped back to, I would say, like most of their more like raw, primal elements. Again, still very melodic, but a lot of this, it feels just more kind of go for the throat on every song. Whereas like Verminous definitely experimented a little bit more. You know, there were, you know, way more like melodic sections that really jumped out on that one. And I've kind of warmed up to Verminous a little bit, even though like it's just attached to kind of a haunting memory for reasons that we've already went into. But there is, again, like this slight experimentation. And Black Dahlia Murder, I would describe as a band that has stayed in their lane pretty much their entire career. But their lane has gotten wider. Like, there's just like subtle things they do differently. Like, you know, you listen to an album like Miasma versus like Everblack. They're two very different albums, but it's still 100% Black Dahlia Murder. It has all the hallmarks. They're just doing certain things differently on each one. This album being more stripped down, more kind of go for the throat, really not bothering much with pretense at all. It feels like the lane has narrowed a little bit, which, I mean, if you live in the Midwest, you should be used to that because construction's fucking perpetual out here. But musically, yeah, it feels like this is kind of like harking back to their earlier years, and again, that sort of go for the throat intensity that they had on like a lot of their earlier albums versus some of their later material where they branched out, albeit kind of subtly, but they still did a little bit. Certain Dominion almost sounds like it could have been plucked off of Nocturnal. Mm-hmm. It has that particular sound, like the riffs aren't as technical, but they are bludgeoning and heavy. Mm-hmm. They're a little bit more straightforward, and the hook kind of lands almost immediately. And then you hear Brian come in on top of the riffs, and his vocal patterns, especially on that song, it has the Trevor sort of like conducting the crowd and everything feel. And I mean, it absolutely kind of warmed my heart a little bit there. Like that's just a good feel for me.
It's a piece of nostalgia. And a lot of this record hits home, and I want to bring that into play too. Like, you got a band that's coming back after something very difficult and wants to put themselves out there and remind everybody that they're still the Black Dahlia Murder, but at the same time, you have to realize that the Black Dahlia Murder was not only a band, but kind of a family. I remember when this band exploded and it just got huge, and like everybody holds on to a piece of this band in different ways, I would say. I think they're just trying to show people like, we're still here. It's not all the way over, but here's a little something that will just remind you of home. And
coming back from what this band has had to come back from, like the loss of a brother, the loss of a friend, that's no easy feat. No. And, with comeback albums, there's a lot of different schools of thought. Some will say, hey, listen, it's okay to play it safe. Come back, reestablish your brand. Yeah. Let fans know that you are still very much the band that they fell in love with. Other schools of thought is like, listen, you're starting a new era. Maybe kick in some different stuff. And I totally understand both. Both have worked for different bands. Both have not worked for different bands.
Right.
So comeback albums are tricky. It's a precarious ledge. And I would say that this one is more of a reaffirming, let's just kind of stick to the formula, do what we do well. And, I don't blame them. Like, it's a safe comeback. I will say that. Like, there's really not a lot of surprises on here. Outside of a few songs with, like, a few moments on here, like, this is very much everything that I expect from Black Dahlia Murder. In that, I would say that this delivers on pretty much everything that I think most of the fans anticipated, what they kind of wanted. But I will say that it does feel a little stripped bare at times. Like, it is very by the numbers. I mean, again, by the numbers, Black Dahlia Murder, I generally don't have a problem with. I'm not saying I have a problem with this at all, but it is tight, aggressive, fast as hell. And, it doesn't really squeeze in a lot of moments for like, nuance. But at the same time, playing it safe, I think kind of makes sense. And honestly, I'd be more excited to hear what they do after this now that they got this one out of the way. Because this had to be like, again, like a giant emotional thing to really come back for this. Yeah. I will say that I do have some issues with the production. The production was handled by Mark Lewis, who mastered it, and Brendan Ellis, who did a lot of the mixing on here. Mm-hmm. The drums are very out front. I do like the sound of them overall, but in terms of the levels, I feel like sometimes the guitars get a little drowned out, especially in the busier sections. Yep. It's a very compressed, very polished mix, but again, with how busy this band is, with all the frequent blasting and, all the different layers on here too, I can kind of understand that, but I do feel like the guitars get a little squashed in the mix.
Yeah, they definitely do. Again, nothing against drumming. I'm a drummer myself. It does sometimes overpower the riffs, and that's a shame because both Brandon Ellis and Ryan Knight are very riffy dudes, and Black Dahlia Murder has always been known for having some killer-ass riffs, and they're all over this record. It's just you can't hear them sometimes. And the bass didn't seem real present to me either, and maybe that's just, I don't know, the speaker we're listening to it on or something, but...
Outside of Asserting Dominion, there's some, like, flashy, like, bass tapping in there.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I really couldn't hear it much, but again, drums being very out front and the frequent blasting... Yeah, stuff could get lost. But overall, I enjoyed this. And God, it would have broke my heart if this sucked. But I didn't think it was going to. Like, this band wasn't going to tarnish their brand.
No.
I am overall going to give it 3.5 stars, though. I think this is a really, really good Black Dahlia Murder album. And it's definitely a pretty safe but solid start for a whole new chapter for the band. It does everything that I pretty much wanted it to. Like, again, it's tight. It is fast. There are great melodies across the board. It still has their token aggression. I love the lead work. Brian sounds fantastic on vocals. It just feels like it is a little stripped bare, and maybe some of like the chances that they did kind of take subtly in songs, it was a little bit more reined in. But at the same time, I could see that that's kind of the album that they probably needed to make here, was one that like, just like, hey, listen, we still have everything that you love in here. Trust me, we're going to come out and just, blow you away live. And I still have yet to catch them with Brian fronting the band, but I definitely plan on it. I mean, Baseline, if you're a longtime Black Dahlia Murder fan, fucking duh. Yeah, dude, check this out. But I mean, also Cattle Decap. Again, like At the Gates and In Flames, albeit played at like Mach 10. Yeah, it's Black Dahlia Murder once again. Welcome back, guys. This is pretty solid. Looking forward to future stuff from you.
I too am at a 3.5. It's always so tough to rate this band. There's a couple of schools of thought behind that. One would be is that this band is pretty much incredibly consistent. 2 would be we just did the ranking, which was difficult in itself, and I don't know where this one would sit. And C would be, again, doubling down on this band. I don't think they have a bad record. Is this my favorite record? No. But it's a hell of an album. This was a great comeback for them. I think they played it safe, but I think that was the way to go, especially coming back. I mentioned it earlier. I know Nick mentioned it. You got to come back and show everybody that you're still here. And they did that. And they did it in true Black Dahlia Murder fashion. It's still fast, aggressive, riffy, in your face, awesome solos. Did anything really jump out? Not too much, but it's still a solid offering. It's still a solid listen. I liked every song. Brian does a great job taking over the full helm of vocals on his own accord. Intricate riffs with no rankery, great melodies, great harmonies, drum work is awesome. It's a really good record. I think that I too am more curious to see what comes after this. Like, I think they just needed to put this out, and they needed to, again, just remind people that they still exist and they're still around, and that it was a tough transition, but they knocked it out. And this is a great record for that. So yeah, 3.5 stars. If you're a fan of the Black Dahlia Murder, you're still going to be a fan of the Black Dahlia Murder with this record. I'm not going to lie to you. You're still going to be like, fuck yeah, man, this is the Black Dahlia Murder. I could compare it to bands all day, but I think what everyone is most looking for is, does this still sound like Black Dahlia Murder? And it does, and it's a good offering. So props to you guys. I'm sure we will catch you guys out there on the road, but great album, fellas.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are, at least for the moment, still on Patreon. If you would like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel. Up in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner, but if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size. And we even have hats, too, so if you're looking for that, click the link down below. And the reason why I say the whole... for the time being on Patreon, we are probably going to be moving over to channel memberships instead of Patreon, just because we feel like if we condense everything to one site, we can interact with you a lot better there. Yeah. So, that's still up in the air. We haven't made the final decision, but you guys are kind of helping us with the whole voting thing, vote on that.
Which brings me to my next thing. Thank you guys for your participation and for letting Thralls of Metal into your lives. It's a huge thing for us. We're very thankful for all of you. Tons of album reviews coming, discography rankings, states of metal, is it not metal, Nick's never-ending collection of dates, bunch of live streams we've been doing. It's been really cool to interact with you guys. All this stuff we do for you. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule, and again, tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because of all your rulage, and we will catch you later.